Today we're going to see if we could turn one of my favorite recipes, the beef Wellington, into a delicious little egg roll. So to start this recipe, you kind of need to understand how a beef Wellington is constructed. I'll put the video link down below, but I'll give you a quick little walkthrough here. Here's a little cross-section photo of the last one I made. You have your puff pastry outside. Inner part you have a crepe and then prosciutto, a mushroom duxelle, which is kind of like finely ground mushroom, watch the video to see, and then a beautiful filet center cut. Instead of the filet, we're going to use a ribeye. It's a little better for thin cut egg rolls, and then we're going to use bigger pieces of mushroom. But to get started, we're just going to very thinly slice this ribeye. It's kind of on a bias here, and it doesn't really need to be against the grain or with the grain. The way the butchers cut steaks, they're already kind of cut against the grain. So just cut them the same way I'm doing it here, and you'll be totally fine. You won't have any really tough pieces, but some are a little thicker than others because I'm not a machine. But what you're going for here is a very thin cut, maybe a 1/16 of an inch. Right about that is what you're looking for. And then once I get them all cut like this, I'm going to go through and look for any large pieces of fat because this is a fairly quick cook in the pan and a fairly quick cook in the fryer. So any large pieces of fat like that are just not going to render, so cut those off. To cook this, I have my carbon steel pan preheated, a bunch of vegetable oil in there, any neutral oil will do, and we're just going to throw these pieces in and then try to spread them out, get as much surface area as you can. You're looking for a little bit of browning here and to cook these basically 90% of the way. Hit them with a little bit of salt at this stage as well and pepper because that's going to be the bulk of the seasoning aside from the dipping sauce. And then once you're ready, start to flip them. That's what we're looking for. There's a little bit of browning starting there, as you can see on that piece. You don't need to go much past that. You do want a little tenderness, and you don't want to overcook them and make them dry because of how thin they are. So right when I get around to this point, I'm going to pull them out with a slotted spoon just to let some of that oil drain. And these are going to go into a bowl where I'm going to then try to get out a little more oil. But while I have that great fat in the pan, I'm going to cook the mushrooms in there as well. We're going to let these mushrooms go for about 5 minutes until they look fairly well cooked. We're going to also hit them with a little bit of salt here to help them release their extra water, and then with that meat over in the bowl, I'm going to just dab it off a little more, get as much of that extra oil that came out, and then like a Wellington, we're going to add some mustard. For a Wellington, you would paint it on right after you sear it and let it kind of soak in, so we're trying the same premise here. We're going to mix this up and just let it sit like that until it comes down to room temperature. There's the mushrooms. That's how far I wanted to cook these. We're also going to take these out onto a piece of paper. I know this is not the right knife to cut these up, but it was the one sitting right there. You don't need a serrated knife for this. But we're going to try to cut them into slightly smaller pieces. And then quickly, we're just going to throw them back onto paper towel in a bowl just to get off some residual water. And now we're going to mix that in with that cooled down steak to make kind of the final mixture. This is all we're really going to add there before we start to assemble these egg rolls. So just mix it up, get them nice and even, and then you're good to go. Now it's time to assemble the egg rolls. I have a little bit of prosciutto here, and then I have my egg roll wrappers. You can get these at mostly any supermarket. We're going to wet around the outside, which will help them seal. I'm going to lay a piece of prosciutto down in the middle. If you want to kind of pan fry this quickly to get it a little crispier, you could also totally do that. Just make sure it doesn't overlap too much with the area you put the water down. That'll just inhibit how it seals. And then we're going to lay down that mix of the beef and the mushrooms. And I know Wellingtons don't have cheese, but what egg roll is not better with a little cheese added? So we're just throwing a little white American. We're going to fold those outsides in, pinch them a little bit to keep them sealed, and then just kind of roll it like a burrito. Toss it over the top, kind of keep it tight, but don't add too much pressure. You don't want to rip the egg roll. There's a lot of videos online on how to do this well. I'm definitely not explaining it great, but just roll it over itself, and that's all you need to do. It's very simple. These will usually stay sealed pretty well, even if you screw up. But while I'm doing the rest, I'm just going to put them onto a plate in the freezer. Here we have some oil, neutral oil in a pan. Also, this great infrared thermometer really helps you get the right temperature. We're at about 330. I let them come up another 20 degrees to 350. And now we're just going to drop these in very slowly. They're going to bubble pretty hard right off the bat, but the seams should not open. They should also float up fairly quickly. If they don't, just get in there and move them around. You can see one's floating, the other one's kind of a little more stubborn. But just move them around. They're not going to stick. You should be fine. Here we are after about 2 minutes. They're starting to really get nice and browned. That's what you're looking for. Still no seams are opening. You'll see the bubbles flare up every once in a while as some of the meat juices and stuff leak out, but overall you want to see the bubbling going down. Here you can see it's very much reduced. I pull them up, I look at them. As I put it back in, a little juice comes out. That's why you see that bubble flare up. But all in all, you know they're done. They're golden brown. They're really not boiling too hard. So we're going to pull those out, throw them onto a piece of paper towel, and cook some sauce. As you remember, when I made demi-glace, I freeze some of it into little cubes like this, and this will be the perfect sauce. So I'm going to melt those down, mount them with a little bit of salted butter, which will just help get the overall seasoning right here. Throw that together, turn the heat off, mix it up nice and well. Add a little more seasoning if you need it, because this is also the only other way you're really going to get seasoning into these egg rolls, and that's all you need to do. This is a demi-glace. Red wine is a perfect dipping sauce for a Wellington and for a Wellington egg roll, but use whatever other dipping sauce you want, but this was perfect. Now it's time to see how we did. They're beautiful, they're crispy, they're golden brown, exactly what we're looking for. Let's pour that demi-glace off into a small little bowl so we have something to dip it into. Now let's cut one of these open. Really excited to see how these turned out. The cut is perfect. You could tell they stayed together, which is lovely. You could see that prosciutto around the outside. That's not raw meat. The cheese could have done another 30 seconds to melt a little more, but all in all, these are just fantastic. Taking that first taste, dipping it in that demi-glace, you really get the flavor of a beef Wellington. If you don't want to go through the process of cooking a whole 4-hour beef Wellington right now, try these. It'll really get the job done.